Did you know that before Frank Gehry designed iconic deconstructivist buildings like the Dancing House in Prague, he honed his skills on his own house first? That's right. You think designs like this just fell out of a coconut tree? No, they exist in the context of his architectural history and development. Gehry was born in Toronto in 1929, but has spent most of his life living in the United States. Throughout his lengthy career, he has gone on to become one of the most famous architects in the world, and his prominence stems from his unconventional, dramatic, and often twisted forms with unorthodox use of materials. Deconstructivism as an architectural movement forms part of postmodern architecture and emerged as a reaction to modernist design. The movement was exhibited at the New York Museum of Modern Art in 1988 by Philip Johnson and Mark Wigley. The style questions the clean, geometric forms and lines of modernism and instead experiments with irregular patterns, perspectives, and materials while embracing contradiction and fragmentation. Looking back through Gehry's career, you can see the development and progression of his style. In the late 1970s, Gehry experimented on his own Santa Monica residence. The residence was a Dutch colonial-style dwelling, and Gehry sought to add his own touch with extensions and additions. His intention with the additions were to balance the fragment and the whole, raw and refined, new and old. In this project, Gehry featured unorthodox materials like chain-link fencing, metal and plywood sheeting, and wooden framing. Gehry was particularly interested by the fact that these materials were universally hated. Gehry plays with forms and structural elements, dismantling and reassembling them into new nonlinear elements, which creates a tension and distortion in the design. He retained much of the original residence to highlight the old, while featuring the new around it. This can be clearly seen in the interior, where the existing exterior wall is kept and forms an internal kitchen wall. The residence has divided opinion. On one hand, it has received complaints to the city and mayor from neighbors, while on the other, received the AIA 25-Year Award, which is awarded to buildings which have stood the test of time for 25 years and continue to set the standard of excellence in design and significance. Comparing Gehry's earlier work to his later work, you can see significant development and refinement in his style. However, there are persistent design elements between the works which, while presenting in a different manner, are still reflected in the structures. In 1996, construction on the Dancing House was completed. This building was constructed as part of the redevelopment of a residence which was bombed during the Second World War and had sat in a decrepit state ever since. The design was inspired by dancing couple Fred Astaire and Ginger Rogers, with Astaire reflected in the static concrete building and Ginger in the dynamic glass building, which contracts in the center while leaning into the static structure adjacent. While implemented in a different manner to the Santa Monica residence, Gehry has again contrasted elements and brought tension into the design by challenging straight lines and classic geometric forms. We see the dismantling and fragmentation of classic forms with the non-linear windows, the curved walls, and the contraction and lean of the glass tower. The protruding window frames and curved moldings on the concrete building further distort perspective. The Dancing House demonstrate Gehry's further development in the use of dynamic elements. From the largely angular forms seen in the Santa Monica residence, Gehry has introduced more organic and non-linear forms into the Dancing House. Similarly to the balancing of new and old and raw and refined seen with the Santa Monica residence, Gehry balanced linear with non-linear to contrast static with dynamic. Much like the Santa Monica residence, this building was also criticized for not matching the character of the area. However, the criticism has largely reduced, and the building now features on local currency. Want to learn more? You can find out much more by looking at the